My world was turned upside down when my brother impregnated my girlfriend. Following this revelation, my parents made the decision to kick me out and use my college fund to raise the child. My life, which I thought was simple, suddenly became complex and challenging. Despite being young and in love with Abba, I had a clear plan for my future. Abba and I were both committed to completing our degrees at university and building a life together. My parents, who seemed like the epitome of a loving and supportive couple, had always emphasized the importance of hard work and family values. However, their actions following the shocking news left me feeling betrayed. Abba and I had envisioned a future filled with big dreams and shared goals. We had met during our freshman year of college and quickly formed a deep connection. As we navigated our relationship over the past 2 years, I had always believed that my parents would be there for me whenever I needed them. Now, as I faced this unexpected turn of events, I had to reassess my plans for the future and find a way to move forward. Ellie, let's pay off my student loans and maybe consider purchasing a home on the outskirts of the city. I could already envision the future, the two of us, a dog, a family, living out the classic American dream. However, I was not prepared for the unexpected news that was about to shake things up. Late one night, ABA dropped a bombshell on me. She was pregnant. Her words took me by surprise and left me speechless. We were not ready for this. We were still figuring things out, pursuing our individual goals. But here it was, a new reality staring us in the face. In the days that followed, we were lost in a whirlwind of emotions and discussions. Abe was determined to proceed with the pregnancy despite her fears, and I stood by her side, understanding her decision. It dawned on me that we were on the brink of a whole new chapter in our lives, one that involved both of us as a unit. However, everything took a dramatic turn when I uncovered a startling revelation about my brother Josh. Having been involved with ABA, the impact of her confession still lingers within me. She was in tears, unable to console herself, her face buried in her hands. Despite her repeated apologies, the pain persisted. My brother, whom I had always cherished as my closest companion, had betrayed me in the most gut-wrenching manner possible. He was the true father of the baby. I was left speechless, my entire world crumbling before me in an instant. How could they have done this to me? How could she? Despite my efforts to comprehend the situation, it felt utterly impossible to do so. ABA and I had shared a relationship for over 2 years. How could things have spiraled to this point? I immediately reached out to Josh for clarity. However, his indifferent response left me shaken. There was no genuine apology, just a casual acknowledgement of the situation and a push to move forward. Move on? My heart lay shattered, unable to make sense of his lack of remorse. And then there were my parents, whose unnervingly composed reaction to the pregnancy felt too serene to be genuine. I can still vividly recall my mother's response, etched in my memory as if it were yesterday. She gazed at me with a neutral expression and then spoke quietly about divine plans. She suggested that everything unfolded as part of a grander scheme, a test of faith, with each person having a designated role that they should embrace. Even my usually strict father silently assented. They seemed to disregard Josh's involvement entirely, as if it held no significance. However, it was when they broached the topic of family support that I found it hard to maintain my composure. They urged me to stand by Josh, emphasizing the importance of demonstrating love and forgiveness and releasing any resentment. They insisted that everything was part of a higher purpose. Despite my intense desire to voice my frustration and explain how they had let me down, my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. They were so entrenched in their beliefs that they couldn't acknowledge the harm being inflicted upon me. The days that followed were tumultuous as my parents persisted in pressuring me, striving to. They insisted that it was for the greater good, that it was to help me become a better person and rise above the situation. Emphasizing that as the older brother, I should set a positive example for the family. The overwhelming sense of hypocrisy started to weigh heavily on me as they mentioned the sacrifices they had made for me and how it was now my turn to make things right. Their constant pressure made me feel suffocated, and I began to realize that everything I had worked towards was slipping away. My dreams of graduating, living independently, and fulfilling my personal goals felt like they were fading like sand through my fingers. My life seemed to be veering off course and being overtaken by decisions that were not mine own. The situation took a turn for the worse when my parents seemed to turn against me, their words and actions feeling like subtle attacks on my autonomy. It became apparent that their support had shifted, leaving me feeling betrayed and trapped in a plan that I did not agree with. They made it clear that they would support Josh in ABA, expecting me to do the same. However, I stood firm in my decision to not support Josh due to his actions. I could not take on the responsibility of caring for the baby, as I had to prioritize my own future. This did not sit well with them, particularly my father, who accused me of selfishness and abandoning my family in their time of need. My mother tearfully pleaded with me to reconsider, emphasizing that I shouldn't turn my back on my brother and that it was a test of faith. Despite their emotional appeals, I couldn't ignore the fact that Josh had never faced consequences for his actions or made amends. Then, replies or conversations revolving around the baby left me feeling unheard and overlooked. The focus was always on Josh, ABA, and the child. I felt like I was no longer a priority in my parents' lives, as they constantly praised Josh's commitment to fatherhood and ABA. It seemed as though they disregarded my perspective and the boundaries that had been crossed. Despite my efforts to do the right thing, my needs were ignored in favor of the child that wasn't even mine. This situation felt like a betrayal, as my life was being reshaped without consideration for my feelings or experiences. After the word caused, insert a comma. After trying to survive, add a period. After shop, include a period. Following returned, insert a comma. Place a comma after remained present. Add a comma after insides. After lost, insert a comma. Place a period after family. Add a period after years. After answer, place a period. After prevailed, add a comma. Include a comma after tentatively. After hello, add a question mark. Place a period after line. Include a comma after herself. Oh, she struggled to explain, her words tumbling out in a jumbled and unclear manner. She told me that they had lost everything they once had. The house, their savings, all the stability they had once felt secure in. It was all gone, she said. She couldn't provide a detailed explanation. Something about a failed investment and a vague reference to fraud. She mentioned that my father had been too proud to acknowledge their troubles until it was too late. Now they were struggling financially, barely able to afford the essentials, barely scraping by to put food on the table. She asked if I was still there, her voice trembling with her own shame. I assured her that I was listening, maintaining a detached and neutral tone. I wanted her to sense the disconnect that had formed when they turned their backs on me. Despite this, she continued, speaking cautiously yet persistently. She expressed her wish that things had turned out differently and her remorse for how they had treated me. She pleaded with me to come back home. I had helped them to fill the role of the son they required when no one else was available. I waited patiently until her words ceased, and her pleas hung in the air like lingering smoke in a confined space. When I finally spoke, my tone was composed, precise, almost detached. I pointed out that 3 years had passed since they had decided they no longer needed me. 3 years since they took away everything I had labored for and handed it over to someone who had not earned it. I elaborated on how, during that period, I had strived to claw my way out of the pit into which they had cast me, reconstructing my life brick by brick in solitude. And now, after all this time, she believed she could contact me and erase all of that with a few tears and a superficial apology. I did not raise my voice. It was unnecessary. Each word was akin to a surgical tool, slicing through any remnants of forgiveness I may have entertained. Despite her attempts to interject, I did not allow it. I made it explicit that she could not alter the past merely for her convenience. I concluded by informing her that I no longer held any significance to her. She conveyed to me that I was insignificant to them in the past, and now meant nothing to them. Her voice trembled with desperation as she questioned if I truly detested them enough to allow them to endure pain. Emphasizing that they were my parents and that familial bonds hold more weight than any other relationship, she pleaded with me. In response, a hollow chuckle escaped me as I pointed out that they only valued blood ties when it benefited them, such as when they required someone to clean up their messes. With deliberate intent to wound, I confessed my limited human understanding compared to divine plans, echoing her own teachings back at her. I reminded her of the times she urged me to accept divine will and set aside personal emotions for the family's sake. I inquired if this predicament was part of the divine scheme, questioning my right to intervene as they expected me to accept my own expulsion. Her sobs filled the phone as she pleaded for me to reconsider. She claimed they regretted their actions and had learned their lesson, but I remained resolute. I made it clear that their repentance was a personal matter between them and their faith, not involving me. I emphasized that I was not their savior or their second chance. Despite her attempts to evoke memories of our shared past and profess her love for me, I pointed out that love cannot be turned on and off like a tap. I reminded her that their past actions, including kicking me out, taking my money, and claiming it was divine will, had shown me a different side of them. Her tears and pleas did not sway me, as I had already endured too much pain and loneliness to be easily moved. I asserted that I owed them nothing, not my time, money, or compassion, as I outlined my stance on the decisions that had been made. The consequences of their actions had finally caught up to them, and I reminded her of the nursery that had been prepared for my brother's son in my old room. I suggested that she should turn to him now, as he was the one they had chosen over me. If anyone should step in to assist them, it should be him. Despite her pleas for me not to end the call, I had already made up my mind. I wished them peace in the same faith they had used against me and terminated the conversation. As I sat there holding the phone, I expected to feel a range of emotions, but instead I was met with a cold emptiness. The distance they had created between us had become insurmountable. I set the phone down and went about my activities as if nothing had occurred. It was unsettling to realize that their desperation, tears, and apologies no longer had any effect on me. They had transformed me into a stranger. I had made a decision, and there was no going back. The phone rang and it was Josh on the line. He greeted me calmly, almost casually, expressing a desire to talk. Memories of the past flooded back as soon as I heard his voice. Memories of the man who had played a role in the catastrophe that had turned my world upside down. Though my stomach clenched and my throat went dry, I maintained a composed demeanor. "What do you want?" I asked bluntly, my tone distant and guarded. I was not going to make things easy for him. Josh acknowledged the complexity of the situation, but hinted that there was more to be said. His tone was grave, as if he had been carrying a weight on his shoulders for too long. Despite my disdain for him, I found myself listening. "I'm sorry," he eventually uttered. Despite my efforts to resist, I couldn't help but hope for a genuine display of accountability, a heartfelt apology. Josh continued speaking slowly, selecting his words with care. He admitted to his mistake. He confessed that he was unsure how to effectively manage the situation, acknowledging that it had escalated beyond his control. He expressed remorse and admitted that he never intended for things to deteriorate so drastically. For a moment, I almost believed in the sincerity of his regret. However, my anger resurfaced quickly, overpowering any fleeting sense of empathy. My voice quivered as I sarcastically echoed his words, wondering if his shallow apology was truly all he had to offer. I was unwilling to accept his inadequate remorse for the havoc he had wreaked, the lies, the selfishness, the disdain he had shown towards me. I made it clear that his apology fell short, failing to address the considerable damage he had inflicted upon me. With one reckless action, he had decimated my life, expecting a mere sorry to absolve him of his responsibility. Josh remained silent, almost as if. I listened as he struggled to find the right words to salvage the conversation, but I no longer cared. I felt no real regret, only a sense of abandonment by my own family. His regret seemed to stem from being caught rather than genuine remorse for his actions. His attempts to reassure me and rectify the situation fell flat, the weight of his words hanging between us. Despite his sincerity, I knew he could not fix the damage he had caused. I had reached my limit and angrily told him to stop. I did not want to hear any more excuses or explanations. It was about the harm he had inflicted and the decision he made to hurt me. Josh declared that our past bond had been utterly betrayed, insisting that nothing could alter this harsh reality. His voice quivered with emotion as he made yet another apology, his tone now tinged with desperation. However, I had reached my limit. His repeated apologies could not erase the pain or repair the damage he had wrought. Dismissing his attempts to seek forgiveness, I informed him that I no longer wished to listen and terminated the conversation. Fast forward to a week later, the phone rang once more, this time displaying a different name on the caller ID. It was Abba, my brother's wife and the mother of the child I had been displaced to accommodate. Despite initial hesitation, my curiosity got the better of me, prompting me to pick up the call. I was intrigued to hear what justification she could possibly provide for implicating me in their troubles. In a soft, cautious voice, as if navigating uncertain terrain, Abba greeted me and expressed her hope for my well-being. She acknowledged the lapse in our previous communication, but I remained silent, allowing her to continue. Uncomfortable silence hung between us as I refused to make things easy for her. Eventually, she broached the main issue at hand. Referring to a conversation with my mother, she described the seriousness of the situation and urged me to consider my nephew. While acknowledging my anger, she emphasized that he was innocent and should not be harmed by the actions of the adults involved. My frustration slowly welled up inside me as she dared to ask me to clean up the mess they had made and now bring a child into the situation. I gritted my teeth, struggling to contain my rising emotions, but she persisted. She mentioned that my nephew looked up to me, despite us never meeting in person, and deserved a chance at a better life. She suggested that forgiveness from me could make a significant difference. In a composed yet chilling tone, I interrupted her and responded. I told her to cease and desist. I clearly communicated that I did not wish to hear another word about that child. I firmly stated that simply mentioning the little one would not erase the years of pain and betrayal I had endured. I made it known that if she believed otherwise, she was more delusional than I had imagined. She appeared taken aback by my blunt response. She stuttered and professed that she had not intended to upset me, but merely wanted me to understand the situation. She mentioned the importance of families sticking together, especially in challenging times. In that moment, I could no longer contain my emotions. I asserted that she had no authority to lecture me about family, given all that transpired. I reminded her of how I was cast out without a second thought to accommodate her and her son. I outlined how my college funds were utilized to create a nursery for the child of the man who had deeply wounded me. I questioned her, demanding to know where my brother, the favored one, stood in all of this. Wasn't he the one taking responsibility for resolving the situation? She attempted to defend him, asserting that he was putting in his best effort and working hard to provide for his family. She mentioned that he was facing immense pressure and they simply needed assistance to get back on track. I let out a bitter and harsh laugh. I told her that her husband had always been self-centered, irresponsible, and only looking out for his own interests, and I doubted that had changed. I pointed out that if she had married him expecting otherwise, it was her error, not mine. I made it clear that I had no obligation to help them, neither her, him, nor their son. She began to cry, her voice trembling as she pleaded for me to reconsider. She explained that they were unsure how they would make it through, as they were on the brink of losing everything. She expressed her fears for her son's future and her uncertainty about where else to turn for assistance. Her tears only fueled my frustration. I told her that if she was feeling scared, she should. Before you got involved with my brother, you should have thought about it, I reminded her. I made it clear that she had chosen her path and now had to face the consequences. Asserting firmly, I told her that her son's future was her responsibility, not mine. I also indicated that if she intended to play the victim, she would have to find someone else to believe her sob story. In a final attempt, she assured me in a trembling voice that she believed I was still a good person who cared about family deep down. She hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive them for the sake of the child's well-being, if not for any other reason. Fed up, I responded sharply, calling her a coward for trying to manipulate me using a child. I labeled her delusional for thinking I would ever forgive them and selfish for expecting me to clean up the mess created by her husband. I pointed out that she and my brother were a good match, two individuals accustomed to taking without giving anything in return. When I completed my statement, she was sobbing uncontrollably. Despite her attempts to speak, I interrupted her and advised her to save her tears, as they would not sway me. I urged her to inform my parents, my brother, and anyone else interested that I was no longer willing to be their scapegoat. Without waiting for her response, I ended the call, my hands trembling not with regret, but with a deep-seated anger that lingered long after the initial fire had died down. As I sat there staring at the phone in my hand, I reflected on the mention of the child she had tried to use as leverage. A brief sense of guilt surfaced, only to be swiftly replaced by the realization that the child was not my responsibility or burden. I had not been the one to introduce him to a world of turmoil and uncertainty. That had been the doing of my brother, his wife, and my parents. It was their choices and actions that had led to the chaos in their lives, and now they were grappling with the consequences. 3 weeks later, I was caught off guard by a call from the church. It had been years since I last thought about them. Religion played a significant role in my upbringing, although it felt more like a tool for control than solace. Upon answering, Pastor Daniel identified himself as the caller, someone I vaguely recalled from my teenage years. He expressed his hope that I remembered him and mentioned that he wished to discuss my family. Bracing myself for a sermon or guilt trip, I was surprised by his calm and understanding demeanor. Pastor Daniel reassured me that he had no intention of taking sides or pressuring me, but he wanted to act as a mediator if I was open to it. He explained that my parents had reached out to the church in desperation, mentioning our past agreement. He believed it valuable to hear my perspective. Despite my initial hesitation, there was something about his approach that put me at ease. His voice carried no hint of judgment, and there was no pressure in his words. He made it clear that the decision to talk was entirely mine, and he respected my right to decline. It felt like he genuinely wanted to listen, not just lecture. I agreed to discuss the situation, but with my own conditions. I made it clear that this wouldn't be a pity party or an attempt at reconciliation. If he hoped for a reconciliation, he needed to grasp the full picture. Pastor Daniel agreed and asked me to share my perspective. I began recounting the events that had led to our estrangement, maintaining a composed and almost detached tone, as if I were narrating a story from a third person's perspective. Pastor Daniel listened attentively, offering silent words of understanding from time to time. I described the subsequent years, the feelings of anger and betrayal that lingered unresolved. I recounted how I rebuilt my life after their disappearance, piece by piece, without their presence. Their recent attempts to reconnect seemed like a desperate ploy to use me once more. After a prolonged silence, Pastor Daniel processed the information I shared, the faint noise of the line indicating his contemplation. Unexpectedly, he expressed deep regret and compassion, acknowledging the injustice I had faced, particularly from my own family. He admitted that he had not fully grasped the extent of the situation, as my parents had given him only a partial account. Pastor Daniel understood that forgiveness could not be easily given, recognizing the lasting damage caused by my family's actions. If forgiveness were to ever come, it would need to be on my terms and in my own time. This acknowledgement came from a representative of the church, marking a significant path. He expressed his intention to keep me in his prayers, not simply as a perfunctory gesture as I had grown used to, but with genuine hopes for my peace and well-being, regardless of the form it may take.